J'ai le grand plaisir d'accueillir M. Keir FITCH, qui est le directeur de cabinet adjoint de Siim KALLAS, le vice-président de la Commission Européenne en charge des transports. Donc on l'a entendu ce matin au travers de l'exposé que nous a fait le représentant de M. Christensen, le représentant du ministre danois des Transports, qui nous a donné les priorités de son agenda pour la présidence européenne. Donc les priorités qui vont être mises en musique par la Commission. Donc la Commission qui a rédigé un livre blanc sur l'achèvement des transports. J'ai lu ce livre blanc, ce qui est disponible sur Internet, et il y a un chiffre qui m'a beaucoup frappé. C'est vous dites qu'à l'horizon 2030, il faudra investir 1500 milliards d'euros pour parachever les infrastructures européennes, et notamment les maillons manquants, plus 1500 milliards d'euros pour les équipements et les véhicules intelligents. Ça fait beaucoup d'argent. On sait que l'Europe traverse une crise financière, les États sont surendettés. Donc la première question est très simple. Est-ce que l'Europe a encore les moyens financiers de parachever le réseau des Européens de transport?
I think the answer has to be yes. What we also show very clearly in the white paper is that transport is absolutely key to the economic prosperity and to the well-being of Europe. Without transport, which represents on its own, depending on exactly how you count it, somewhere between 5 and 15% of the economy, without transport we cannot have the rest of the economy, so we have to make transport work at the centre of it. And of course, although these figures sound very large, they are spread over a period of, in the case of the ones you've just quoted, effectively 20 years. They will come from a mixture of public investment and private investment. This is not all money that has to come from taxation. And for example, most of the investment in airlines today is done by the airline companies themselves. So they are realisable. In the past, we've spent a lot more on transport than we do today. If you go back to the 1950s, we spent something like 1.5% of gross domestic product in Western Europe on building up transport infrastructure. Today, in the West, it's only about half of that, because it's more in Eastern Europe where we're still rebuilding after communism. So it can be done, and the message we're sending is it has to be done, it will be hard, but if we don't focus on doing it now, it will become even more difficult in the future.
Alors, l'autre question, évidemment, puisque le thème central de ce congrès, c'est l'intermodalité. Comment est-ce que dans la feuille de route de la Commission européenne s'intègre cet objectif d'intermodalité? Quels sont les grands projets sur lesquels vous allez mettre l'accent pour faire que les transports soient mieux articulés entre eux et que surtout les passagers puissent avoir accès à un réseau de transport, on puisse passer du train aux transports publics régionaux? Quels sont les grands projets prioritaires?
One good example is the Trans-European Networks for Transport project, which we announced last year. This is we already have the TENs as they're called, but we set out in October last year our vision for the work that should be done on the TENs for the next budgetary period, so for the 2014 to 2020 period. And intermodality is absolutely key to that. For example, in terms of passenger transport, we're looking for a much closer integration between particularly rail and air. So we have said that all the key airports in Europe by 2030 should be rail connected. By 2050, even more of them, but by 2030 all the key airports. So that's one way of achieving the intermodality. Another project that we're working on, very important for the work you're doing, is to do with through ticketing, where we have expressed a very clear political objective that there should be both information available on all different travel opportunities in a single website or whatever, and that as far as possible through ticketing should be possible, certainly within modes internationally but also across modes. Now, of course this isn't something that the Commission will deliver alone, but we're working on it through the money we commit to research through ITS. We've got competition running at the moment to look at some of the best examples of intermodal journey planners, and we'll be announcing a winner for that shortly. On the more technical side, with the Railways Agency, we're working on what is wonderfully called the TAP TSI, but it's basically a technical specification which helps ensure that railways provide all their ticketing and timetabling information in a common format, which can then be used by other operators or potentially by people who are integrating information. So there are a range of projects like that ongoing.
Alors on va en reparler ce soir avec Bernard Soulage du comité des régions européennes. Expliquez-nous pour ces grands projets européens, comment ça s'articule entre la Commission, le Conseil et les régions, parce que les régions sont intéressées évidemment, on a parlé tout à l'heure des problèmes de déplacement transfrontalier, il y a également le fonds de cohésion territoriale. Comment est-ce que tout ça s'articule? Qui décide? Est-ce que les régions ont leur mot à dire?
There are two main funding mechanisms which are available in Europe for transport infrastructure. One is the one I just referred to, the 10Ts, the Trans-European Networks of Transport. The other, which only applies to particularly the newer member states in the east and south and to certain regions, are the cohesion funds that you mentioned. For both of these, the starting point, as with anything in Europe, is a proposal from the Commission. So that, in terms of the TENs, but in fact there was one also for cohesion funds, is what we made last year. Now, the proposal we made for the TENs was developed by a very interactive process where my colleagues who were working on that spent a great deal of time talking to each individual member state about what they needed, what they wanted, and we converted that into a programme for the whole of Europe. Now, we were trying actually to do this rather differently to the way it's been done in the past, because we obviously only have a limited amount of money available at the centre, and we want to make sure that is really spent in the best interests of Europe as a whole. So what we are trying to do is to concentrate that money on the missing links in pan-European transport, on the cross-border links, on the bottlenecks which may be more important for through transport than within an individual city. But nonetheless, in developing that methodology in the network that derives from it, we spent a lot of time talking to member states, finding out what they wanted. I don't think we deliberately went out and talked to regions, but very many regions have come to us. My colleagues who are dealing with it are seeing regional representatives all the time, so we're very, very well aware of what the regions want as well in that respect. Now, how does the process go on? Well, this is actually all linked to the multi-annual financial framework. The Commission works with 7-year budgets, which are agreed by the Council every 7 years. So we're making the new proposal for the budget in parallel with all this. And there is a huge discussion going on now involving both the Council and the Parliament, basically to agree the proposals, or probably not entirely to agree the proposals. The actual 10T's proposal is qualified majority, so it has to get the majority in the Parliament, qualified majority of member states. The budget itself, though, requires unanimity still, so that will be obviously a much bigger fight, and the net contributor member states are, of course, very keen to cut the amount of money, so they will, unfortunately, inevitably reduce the amount of money from our aspirations. Now, we think that transport networks are actually economically, as I said, very important and very good value to spend the money on. So in our proposals, we asked for 32 billion euros for the 7-year period. That, I'm sure, will be cut, but we're very hopeful that we will come off relatively lightly at the cuts. We think this is good value, and we think that we're getting that message across to the member states.
Merci.